Hello there, and welcome. Wherever you are, whether the day is ending or just beginning, I invite you to slow down for a moment. Let the world outside your window soften a little. The sound you hear right now, maybe it's a fan, a car far away, or simply the hum of quiet air. It's enough, because tonight we're going somewhere deeper than noise, somewhere beneath the surface of the ocean, and maybe beneath the surface of memory itself. The question waiting there is gentle but enormous. Why did Atlantis disappear? If it ever existed, why did it vanish so completely that all we have left are stories, whispers, and dreams? It's a strange thing, isn't it? That one of the most famous places in human imagination might never have existed at all, and yet the idea of it refuses to die. Like a candle still glowing under the water, the story of Atlantis keeps flickering in our collective mind. Maybe you've seen drawings, perfect circles of land and water, a shining city, towers made of white stone and orichalcum. Maybe you've heard that it sank in a single day and night of misfortune. Or maybe you only know the name Atlantis, and already it feels ancient, powerful, familiar. Plato was the first to tell it, nearly 2,400 years ago. He said it was a great island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, a kingdom blessed with wealth, knowledge, and beauty, but eventually corrupted by pride. The gods, he wrote, punished it. The earth trembled, the sea rose, and the island vanished beneath the waves. Simple, but simple stories are rarely small. They hide more than they reveal, because if you listen carefully to Plato's words, the tale of Atlantis isn't really about geography. It's about human nature. It's about what happens when power forgets humility, when brilliance loses balance. Still, people kept asking, what if it was real? What if those glittering rings of land and water once existed somewhere on Earth? What if the ocean is still hiding their ruins, silent, patient, waiting to be found? And so, century after century, we've searched. We've looked in the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean, beneath Antarctica's ice. We've mapped, measured, imagined. But maybe the real Atlantis isn't a location. Maybe it's a question. Because when you say Atlantis, you're not just naming a place. You're naming an ache, that quiet ache humans feel when we look at the sea and sense that something vast has been lost. The sea does that to us. It whispers of things erased. It moves constantly, polishing the bones of continents, hiding entire stories beneath its shimmer. Every wave that breaks on the shore has crossed over forgotten ground, places that once were dry, once were alive. The ocean remembers, but it remembers in silence. Think about that for a moment. Our world is mostly water. 70% of Earth's surface lies beneath it. And yet we know more about the surface of Mars than we do about our own seabed. Down there, in the cold darkness, mountains higher than the Alps rise unseen. Canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon cut through the crust. Volcanoes breathe without sound. Whole ecosystems glow softly, untouched by sunlight. If there were ruins, walls, temples, cities, the ocean would keep them secret well. But let's not rush toward discovery. Let's stay with the feeling of mystery. It's softer here, more honest. Imagine yourself drifting at the edge of sleep. You're floating on your back in calm water. The stars above are steady. Beneath you, a quiet depth opens, cool, endless, dark blue turning to black. And somewhere down there, beyond where light can reach, lies the memory of a city that may never have been. What if Atlantis didn't vanish at all? What if it's simply the name we give to everything humanity forgets? To every golden age that ends? Every civilization swallowed by time, every dream we lose but still miss. When Plato described Atlantis, he wasn't writing history. He was writing a warning and maybe a lullaby. He wanted us to remember that even the brightest societies can sink when they believe themselves unsinkable. That wisdom, like an island, can drown when surrounded by waves of pride. And yet, here we are thousands of years later, still wondering, still hoping. Maybe that's the most beautiful part of the myth. It reminds us that curiosity survives destruction, that even if something disappears, the longing for it can keep glowing in the dark. So tonight, as we begin this journey together, don't worry about proving or disproving Atlantis. Let the question itself be the destination. Why did Atlantis disappear? Because all things do. Because nothing stays above the surface forever. Because every rise carries within it the seed of its own fall. And maybe, in understanding that, we understand ourselves a little more. So breathe. Listen to the soft rhythm of your own body, the tide that never leaves the shore of your skin. The world outside can wait. For now, we'll drift into the story of a city that sank and the deeper truth it left behind. When you open your eyes beneath the sea of time, everything becomes slower. Sound turns to echo, color fades into memory, and the world feels made of silence. That's the space where myths are born between what we remember and what we imagine. Atlantis lives exactly there, not on any map, not in any depth chart, but in the thin mist between truth and story. And that's why it refuses to die. When Plato spoke of Atlantis, he claimed it was not his invention. He said the story came from Solon, a wise Athenian who had traveled to Egypt generations before. In the temples of Sais, the Egyptian priests, old and careful, told Solon of a great island beyond the known world, an island that had once ruled the seas, and then was gone. They said it happened 9,000 years before their time. 9,000 years before history itself had even begun. Imagine hearing that in the flicker of an oil lamp, with hieroglyphs staring down from the walls, the idea of an empire older than empires, erased before the first pyramid was built. Even Solon, a man of reason, must have felt a shiver. Plato then passed the tale to his students, but he didn't present it as pure history. He placed it inside a dialogue between men of thought and myth, between reality and parable. For Plato, Atlantis wasn't just an ancient island, it was a mirror. He was teaching through metaphor, as philosophers often do, a story about a city that lost its balance, just as societies of his own time were losing theirs. The Greeks loved balance, symmetry, proportion, harmony. To them, the universe itself was a song played in tune. So when Plato wrote that Atlantis fell because it became greedy, violent, and arrogant, he wasn't simply describing a natural disaster. He was describing disorder, the breaking of harmony. In his world, that was the greatest tragedy of all. But human beings are not content with metaphor. We want proof. We want to touch what we imagine. And so, over centuries, thinkers and dreamers turned his parable into a mystery to solve. In the Renaissance, explorers whispered that maybe Atlantis had been the Americas. After all, a vast land did exist beyond the Pillars of Hercules, just as Plato said. In the 19th century, others searched the Atlantic floor, believing that science would soon find what myth had hidden. In the 20th, mystics like Edgar Cayce spoke of crystal cities under the sea. And now, in the 21st, we map the ocean with satellites and sonar, still chasing that ghost of geometry lost beneath the waves. Why? Because Atlantis speaks to something deeper than history, to the ache of remembering what we've forgotten. It's the same longing that makes us dig for fossils, open tombs, study starlight billions of years old. We are a species that cannot stop looking backward. We search for our origin stories because they make our endings feel less lonely. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the first time the story was told aloud. A teacher's voice echoing across marble walls, the air warm with the scent of oil lamps. The students leaning forward, listening to the image of a perfect city, rings of water and land, palaces of gold, people who had everything and lost it all. The image entered their dreams, and from those dreams it entered ours. Thousands of years later, we still see it not in clear form, but as a shape made of longing. That's what myths do. They survive not because they are true, but because they feel true. They live in the part of us that knows without proof, the part that feels awe when we see the sea or watch a storm forming on the horizon. Atlantis belongs to that feeling. It's not a story about evidence. It's a story about memory. Some scientists say that myths often grow around real events, that maybe there was a disaster long ago, a great eruption or flood that wiped out a people and a place. Over generations, memory becomes story, and story becomes legend. It's not hard to imagine that, because the ocean has been swallowing coasts for millennia. Villages and temples lost to rising tides, to tsunamis, to earthquakes that split the world open. To the people who lived then, it must have felt like divine punishment. To us, it looks like geology, but both are ways of saying the same thing. The earth moves, and we remember. If you've ever stood by the sea at night, you know how it feels to look at something that can erase entire worlds without meaning harm. It's beautiful and cruel in the same breath. That's why Atlantis feels familiar. It's not just a story about an ancient island. It's a story about fragility, ours, yours, mine. Every generation fears the flood. Every civilization believes it's too advanced to vanish. And yet, time keeps proving us wrong. Maybe that's why we dream of Atlantis, because it lets us rehearse our own disappearance in peace. It gives us a way to imagine loss without feeling despair. It tells us that even when an entire world drowns, its story floats back to the surface. So as you drift further into this quiet night, let the boundaries blur between history and dream, between science and myth, between what was and what could be. Atlantis lives exactly there, between myth and memory. It's not a place you can visit. It's a place you return to every time you wonder what came before. Every time you stand at the edge of something vast and feel small. Every time you close your eyes and see a light flickering beneath the sea. And maybe that's the real secret. Atlantis didn't disappear at all. It simply changed form, from a city of stone to a story made of sound, from land to legend, from reality to memory. The night is quiet now. You can almost hear it breathing slow, steady, like the rhythm of the tide. If you listen closely, there's a faint vibration beneath everything, as though the earth itself is whispering something too old for language. Maybe it's the sound of continents remembering what they used to be. Because long before maps, before borders, before the very word civilization, the surface of our planet was in motion. Not metaphorically, literally. Mountains rose, oceans opened, land masses split apart like drifting clouds of stone. Whole continents appeared, disappeared, and reformed again. And if we could look back far enough, farther than memory or myth, we might find that the idea of Atlantis, a world lost to water, is not as impossible as it seems. Imagine, for a moment, the Earth as it once was, one great supercontinent, Pangaea, floating on the slow breath of tectonic plates. For millions of years it stayed together a single body, pulsing with forests, deserts, and life. Then, slowly, it began to tear itself apart. The fragments drifted, shaped by time and heat and gravity. New oceans were born between them, and in that constant motion, in that endless cycle of creation and disappearance, whole regions slipped beneath the sea forever. Scientists call them sunken lands, places like Doggerland, the drowned plains that once connected Britain to Europe, or Sunderland, the vast continent that stretched beneath today's Indonesia, where rivers once flowed across what is now ocean floor. People lived there. They hunted, built shelters, raised families, never knowing that one day their world would vanish under rising tides. And when the sea came, it came slowly, one generation at a time, a little more shoreline, lost each year. To those who watched, it must have felt like the end of the world. Not a single day and night of catastrophe, as Plato wrote, but a long drowning, silent, patient, inevitable. Is it possible that Atlantis was one of those places? A real land swallowed by water, its story carried through generations, until it reached Plato's pen, wrapped in myth and memory. No one can say for sure, but if you look at a map of the ocean floor, you'll see how the edges of our continents stretch outward, broad and shallow before plunging into darkness. Those shallow shelves, now home to corals and currents, were once dry plains and valleys. They were the first to drown when the Ice Age ended, and glaciers melted into the sea. The ocean rose, not by centimeters, but by mountains of water. It took centuries, but to the people who lived on those shores, it would have felt like the slow punishment of the gods. Every coastline hides such ghosts. The Baltic once had forests where ships now sail. Off the coast of India, divers have found stone walls buried beneath sand and silt. And near the Mediterranean, ancient ports rest beneath clear blue waves, their columns still standing, their courtyards filled with fish. We call them ruins, but they are really reminders that land itself is temporary, that the ground beneath our feet can shift, that permanence is only an illusion we build to feel safe. Maybe that's why the story of Atlantis keeps echoing across time, because it isn't just about one island. It's about the pattern of rise and fall that repeats everywhere, always. It's about the way Earth creates and destroys with the same calm grace. Even today, the planet is still reshaping itself. New islands rise in volcanic arcs, while others sink slowly into the sea. Entire cities, from Jakarta to Venice, are already learning the language of water, the same language Atlantis must have spoken before it drowned. Perhaps every civilization is a kind of Atlantis in waiting. We build our walls, our towers, our stories, and believe they'll stand forever. But the ocean is patient. It waits. And when the moment comes, it reclaims everything, not out of anger, but out of rhythm. If you close your eyes, you can almost picture it, a continent slipping back into silence. The forests vanish first, swallowed by tides. Then the temples, the roads, the fires of the night, until nothing remains but water and memory. And maybe, just maybe, the people who survived carried the memory of that loss in their songs, their symbols, their myths. Over centuries, the story drifted from one mouth to another, changing shape like a wave, until one day it reached Greece, and a philosopher wrote it down as a parable, a story about pride, balance, and the slow justice of nature. Atlantis, then, is not only a place, it's a mirror of the earth itself. The planet remembers what it loses, just as we remember what we long for. Every mountain we see today was once ocean floor. Every grain of sand was once part of a stone. Nothing truly disappears. It only changes form. Maybe that's the real echo we hear when we dream of Atlantis. Not the sound of a city sinking, but the memory of the earth breathing, in and out, creating and erasing, over and over again. So, as you drift tonight, imagine the world beneath the waves. Mountain ranges sleeping underwater, rivers still carving unseen valleys, currents moving like thoughts through the mind of the planet. Somewhere in that quiet darkness, Atlantis still hums not as a ruin, but as an idea too large to drown. And maybe, in some way we can't measure, that echo still reaches us. Every time we stand at the edge of the sea, feeling both safe and small, we are hearing the same thing. The whisper of worlds the earth once held and let go. Listen for a moment. Beneath everything else, beneath the hum of your room, the quiet rhythm of your breathing, there is a softer sound. It's the sound of movement that never stops. The slow, endless heartbeat of the ocean. The ocean never sleeps. Even when the surface seems still, the deep currents are always turning, carrying warmth and cold, life and memory across the skin of the planet. It's the oldest traveler we know, and the most patient one. If the earth were a living being, the ocean would be its mind vast, unpredictable, capable of both creation and forgetting. It gives and it takes. It nourishes and it erases. When we think of Atlantis, we think of a city swallowed whole. Its temples, its people, its pride, all devoured by waves. But the truth is, the ocean doesn't devour out of cruelty. It simply follows its rhythm. It moves like time itself forward, always forward. And whatever stands still too long is eventually taken with it. Scientists say the sea began 4 billion years ago, born from the breath of volcanoes and the condensation of a cooling world. Since then, it has been sculpting everything we see, smoothing the sharp edges of continents, carving cliffs, carrying continents' dust across the world. Every shore is a record of its touch. Every island, a momentary pause in its endless rewriting. We often think of the ocean as stable blue, eternal, familiar, but it's one of the most restless things that exists. It rises and falls, freezes and melts, spreading across the land like a painter testing new colors. It doesn't just drown cities, it also builds them. Every coastline we walk today is made from the ruins of the last one. In a sense, Atlantis is everywhere. Every grain of sand was once something solid, a mountain, a home, a wall. The ocean grinds it down, turns it to memory, and then uses it again to shape something new. Destruction and creation aren't opposites here. They're the same gesture, seen from two directions. Sometimes, the ocean's erasures happen slowly, a few inches of shoreline lost each year. Sometimes, they're sudden and absolute, a wall of water rushing inland, a tsunami swallowing a world in seconds. And after it passes, silence returns, as if nothing ever stood there. If you were standing on the shore the night Atlantis fell, if it fell at all, you would have seen the horizon tremble first. A strange stillness in the air, as though the sky were holding its breath. Then a low sound, not thunder, not wind, but something deeper, the kind of sound that comes from inside the earth. And then darkness rising, water moving where water had never moved before, cities of light vanishing under a single breath of the sea. That's how the earth resets itself, not in anger, but in balance. We often talk about the sea as if it were indifferent, but maybe it's just honest. It shows us, without words, that everything we build will one day return to motion. Even stone forgets its shape eventually. Even empires dissolve back into the elements that made them. And yet, there's beauty in that truth, because when the ocean erases, it doesn't erase completely. It transforms. The marble of an ancient column becomes the white sand of a distant beach. The bones of old forests become coral reefs. Even light itself, when it enters the sea, doesn't die. It bends, softens, and becomes something new. Atlantis may have vanished, but perhaps its particles are still drifting through the currents, becoming part of everything that came after. A whisper of its stones in the cliffs of Portugal, a trace of its dust in the water you drink, a memory of its gold in the sunlight that breaks on the waves. If you let that thought settle, you begin to realize that the ocean doesn't destroy history. It keeps it differently. It folds it into itself, layer upon layer, like pages in a book written in salt and time. To read that book, you don't need eyes. You need silence, because silence is the only language the ocean truly speaks. It says, everything returns. It says, nothing is lost, only changed. And if you listen long enough, you might even hear your own heartbeat aligning with its rhythm. Maybe that's why we're drawn to the sound of waves when we can't sleep, because somewhere deep inside, we recognize that motion, that endless repetition of appearing and disappearing. It's how the universe breathes. It's how memory works. It's how we heal. So tonight, as you breathe, imagine each exhale as a tide leaving the shore and each inhale as the tide returning. You are part of the same cycle, a small, breathing wave in the ocean of time. Atlantis disappeared, but maybe not into nothing, maybe into everything, maybe into the sea that surrounds you now, whispering in the dark, waiting for you to remember that what the ocean erases, it also keeps forever. If you close your eyes now, you can still feel the sea breathing. It moves through you like a thought you almost remember, gentle, but heavy with meaning. And as it moves, something becomes clear. Maybe Atlantis was never only about a place. Maybe it was about us. Because every time humanity builds something grand, a city, a tower, a dream, we are building another Atlantis. And every time we lose it, we are watching our reflection sink beneath the waves. Plato's story was never meant to be a map. It was a mirror. He wasn't describing lost geography, he was describing the human condition. A civilization that rises, flourishes, and falls, not because of fate, but because of something deep inside its own brilliance. He said the people of Atlantis began as noble and wise. They lived in harmony with the sea. They honored their gods. They respected balance. But slowly, as power grew, humility faded. Desire replaced wonder. Greed replaced gratitude. And so, the story says, the divine part of them weakened until they no longer heard the voice of their own conscience. That was when the sea came for them. But perhaps it wasn't punishment. Perhaps it was reflection, because if you look closely, you'll see the pattern everywhere in history. Civilizations rise like tides: Babylon, Egypt, Rome, the Mayans, the Khmer, the Inca. Each believed it was eternal. Each built monuments to its certainty, and each eventually fell, leaving only stones and silence and lessons whispered into the future. Maybe Atlantis is all of them, a symbol that gathers every rise and fall into one shimmering image, a world that forgot its limits. It's strange, isn't it? How the things that make us powerful are also the things that undo us. Curiosity, invention, ambition, they are the same forces that lift a civilization to greatness and push it toward its own edge. We invent fire to survive and then use it to wage war. We seek knowledge to understand and then use it to control. We reach for the stars and forget the ground beneath us. Perhaps Atlantis didn't fall because it was wicked. Perhaps it fell because it was human. The story invites us to wonder, are we any different now? We have our own oceans of technology, our own temples of light and data. We live in towers higher than Plato's imagination could stretch. We speak across continents in an instant, but in quiet moments, we still wrestle with the same question. How much power can we hold before we lose ourselves in it? Maybe the reason Atlantis haunts us is because it feels like a prophecy we are always about to fulfill. And yet, there is tenderness in the warning. Plato didn't write with anger. He wrote with longing. He believed in balance, in the idea that wisdom and wonder should walk together. Atlantis was not destroyed by nature. It was reclaimed by it. It returned to the sea, to the element it had once respected. It went home. When we forget balance, the world reminds us. When we forget gratitude, time humbles us. And when we forget that we are part of something larger, the ocean shows us our reflection. Beautiful, fragile, temporary. That's why Atlantis is still alive. Not in ruins, not in coral or sand, but in the way we think about progress, the way we look at our cities and wonder if they can last. It is the story behind every collapsed empire, every quiet museum, every skyscraper reflected in the river below it. If you look into that reflection, you'll see what Plato saw, that the line between creation and destruction is as thin as the line between pride and awe. We build, we reach, we dream, and then, sooner or later, we return to silence. But that silence isn't defeat, it's renewal. In the rhythm of the universe, everything that disappears is preparing to begin again. Every fall is a form of learning, every end an opening. If Atlantis mirrors humanity, then maybe its disappearance was never meant to frighten us. Maybe it was meant to remind us that nothing built from arrogance can last, but everything born from wonder can return. So, as you listen now, let that thought settle like soft sand in your mind. You, too, are part of this cycle. You rise, you change, you let go. And in each letting go, something wiser begins. Atlantis may have vanished, but the idea of balance between knowledge and humility, between power and peace, is still here. It lives quietly inside every person who pauses to wonder. And maybe that's the real survival of Atlantis. Not its temples or technology, but the echo of its lesson, that beauty without wisdom is fragile, and that every wave that takes something away also teaches us how to begin again. So breathe, let the mirror clear. The sea is calm tonight, and in that calm, if you listen closely, you might hear the faintest reflection of your own heartbeat, a reminder that what disappeared was never truly gone. Centuries passed, and still the name would not sink. Atlantis, half myth, half memory, kept floating in the imagination of humankind. Every era found its own reflection in it, and every seeker tried to make the reflection real. The philosophers became dreamers, the dreamers became explorers, and the explorers became scientists, each one chasing the same ghost beneath different waves. When the Renaissance came, Europe looked outward again. Ships began to circle the globe, searching for new lands and older stories. Maps were drawn wider, oceans named and measured, and somewhere between those expanding blue lines, Atlantis waited not on paper, but in possibility. The Italian scholar Francesco Patrizzi wrote that Plato's story might describe the newly found Americas. It seemed to fit, a vast land across the ocean, rich and strange, home to civilizations older than Europe had known. To many, it felt like proof. Atlantis had not vanished, it had simply been rediscovered. But as explorers pressed further, no perfect rings of land appeared. No golden temples rose from the shores. Only people real, living people with their own stories, their own histories far older than the myth of Atlantis. The dream had found a world, but the world did not need the dream. Still, the search didn't end, because what humanity loves most isn't finding, it's seeking. The act of looking is its own kind of faith. By the 19th century, the industrial age had given us new tools, new certainties, and new questions. The ocean was no longer just a mystery, it was a frontier waiting to be measured. In 1882, a man named Ignatius Donnelly, a US congressman and amateur scholar, published a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. He gathered every myth, every flood story, every fossil he could find, and declared that all of them pointed back to one great lost civilization. He wrote that Atlantis was the cradle of all cultures, the origin of Egyptian pyramids, Mayan temples, Greek philosophy, even Norse gods. To Donnelly, the ocean wasn't emptiness, it was a graveyard of beginnings, and his book, passionate, strange, and impossible to ignore, reignited the fire. For a time, people believed again. Scientists debated him, poets adored him, mystics adopted him. He had built a bridge between reason and wonder, and across that bridge, countless seekers followed. Then came the 20th century, and with it, the age of machines and sonar. The ocean floor, once invisible, began to reveal its contours. Mountains rose from the depths on the new maps. Trenches fell away like open wounds in the earth. And in those first blurred scans, people saw shapes, circles, grids, patterns that looked almost too deliberate. They said, there it is, the lost city at last. But the lines were only ridges of rock, the walls only tricks of shadow and scale. Atlantis, once again, slipped through the fingers of discovery. Yet some refused to let go. In the 1,930 seconds and 40 seconds, the American clairvoyant Edgar Cayce spoke of Atlantis not as past, but as future. He claimed it had been real, a place of high spiritual and technological knowledge that misused its power. He said fragments of that ancient wisdom would soon rise again, along with remnants of the lost land itself near the Bahamas. His followers waited. Some still do. The scientists looked at data, the mystics looked within. Both, in their own ways, were chasing the same horizon, the feeling that something vast and meaningful lies just beyond what we can prove. And perhaps that's the true reason the search never ends. Because Atlantis isn't just an archaeological mystery, it's an emotional compass pointing toward the deepest question in us. What have we forgotten? When a diver descends into the dark, the light from above fades quickly blue, then green, then black. And yet, the deeper they go, the more they feel they're approaching something alive, something that doesn't want to be found, but doesn't want to be forgotten either. Atlantis feels the same way. In recent decades, oceanographers have found entire drowned landscapes, not Atlantis, but echoes of it. Ancient riverbeds buried under the North Sea. Ruins off the coast of Egypt, the sunken city of Heracleion, once thought to be only legend. These discoveries remind us that myths often begin as memories, and that the earth keeps secrets the sea is slow to give back. Still, even the most precise instruments haven't answered the question that keeps returning like a tide. Why do we need Atlantis to be real? Maybe it's because we want to believe that greatness existed before us, that human brilliance isn't new, but part of a cycle. Maybe it's because we want proof that we, too, can rise again after falling. Or maybe we're afraid that what happened to Atlantis, whatever it was, could happen to us. The scientists seek knowledge. The mystics seek meaning. But under both searches lies the same quiet desire to connect what is known with what is felt, to bridge the measurable world with the invisible one. Atlantis sits exactly on that bridge, a myth balanced between science and soul. And as each generation sends new ships, new theories, new dreams into the sea, the ocean waits with the same calm smile, as if to say, "You won't find me, but you'll find yourselves." Because that's what seekers always discover in the end. Not the city beneath the waves, but the reflection of their own longing, the part of them that can't stop asking questions, even when the answers are lost. So tonight, as you rest, remember the explorers, the thinkers, the believers, the wanderers. They all looked for Atlantis in the ocean. But perhaps Atlantis was never under the sea. Perhaps it was always beneath the surface of the human heart. Morning sunlight pours over the Aegean like molten gold. It touches white cliffs, olive trees, and quiet blue water that hides centuries of silence. Somewhere beneath this light, under layers of ash and salt, lies one of the oldest mysteries in human memory. Here, where Greece meets the sea, the story of Atlantis begins to feel almost possible. Because if any real place ever matched Plato's description, an island of wealth and wisdom destroyed by the sea, it might have been right here, among these islands once known as Thera, now called Santorini. Long ago, before its crescent shape was broken by fire, Thera was whole, a circular island, fertile and rich, dotted with small cities. Its people were traders, sailors, builders, artists. They painted dolphins and lilies on the walls of their homes. They built multi-story houses with drains and windows, long before much of the world had learned to do so. These were the Minoans, a civilization that flourished on Crete and across the Aegean around 3,500 years ago. They were lovers of color, of movement, of the sea itself. Their frescoes dance with the same rhythm as the waves, their art filled with spirals and motion, as if they knew that everything circles back. And then, one day, the circle broke. Around 1600 BCE, the mountain at the center of Thera began to tremble. The island that had been paradise became restless. Smoke rose where birds once flew. Then, in a moment that must have felt eternal, the mountain tore itself apart. The eruption that followed was one of the largest in recorded history, 4 times stronger than Krakatoa, powerful enough to blot out the sun across the eastern Mediterranean. Ash fell on Egypt. The air turned dark. The sea, pushed by shock and fire, rose in enormous waves that struck Crete and the coasts beyond. An entire world drowned not just in water, but in silence. Archaeologists digging through the ruins of Akrotiri, a Minoan town buried perfectly beneath volcanic ash, found frescoes still vivid, stairways still standing, cups and tables left as if their owners would return any minute. But they never did. It's hard not to think of Plato's words. In a single day and night of misfortune. Could this be the memory that inspired him? A real catastrophe, retold through centuries of story until it became Atlantis? It fits almost too well. A brilliant island civilization, wealthy and proud, lost suddenly to the sea and fire, a circle of land surrounding water, now reduced to the broken crescent shape we see today. Even the timeline, though not perfect, lies within the range of forgotten memory. What Plato's Egyptian priests called 9,000 years could easily have been 900, a simple mistranslation that turned history into myth. But even if Thera was Atlantis, the story's truth isn't only geological, it's human. Imagine the survivors, people who fled by boat as the sky turned black, watching the sea where their homes once stood. Imagine the stories they told their children and grandchildren, stories of an island that shone like gold and vanished overnight, stories of gods, of punishment, of fire from heaven. Those stories would travel like driftwood across generations, from Crete to Egypt, from Egypt to Greece, changing shape but never losing their pulse. That's how myths move, not through maps, but through hearts that refuse to forget. The eruption of Thera didn't just destroy a world, it reshaped the region's history. It weakened the Minoans, opening the way for the rise of the Mycenaeans, warriors, kings, and poets who would later tell of Troy, of Odysseus, of Poseidon's wrath. It was as if one age sank and another was born from its waves. Just as Plato wrote, Atlantis didn't end history, it transformed it. And when you look at the remains, those elegant staircases descending into dust, those fragments of murals showing people smiling as they leap over bulls, you can feel something strangely modern in them. They remind us that beauty can exist right up until the moment it ends. Every civilization carries within it a quiet volcano, a pressure that grows unseen beneath its own achievements. Sometimes that volcano is literal. Sometimes it's something else: ambition, greed, forgetfulness. But when it erupts, what follows is always the same: a silence so deep that only the ocean can fill it. Standing on Santorini today, with tourists walking above the caldera and sunlight glittering on the water, it's hard to imagine the destruction beneath your feet. The island feels peaceful, even joyous. Yet the sea that sparkles there once boiled with ash and thunder. It's a reminder that beauty and ruin often share the same ground. Maybe that's why Atlantis feels so eternal, because it's not just about what was lost, but about how quickly paradise can become memory. And yet, there's a strange kind of mercy in that cycle. The same eruption that ended one world created new land, new life, new stories. The sea took, but it also gave. In its erasure, it left a message that nothing, not even destruction, is final. When we say Atlantis disappeared, perhaps what we mean is that it changed shape, from island to ash, from memory to myth, from fear to fascination. It didn't sink to die, it sank to be remembered differently. So tonight, if you close your eyes, imagine the Mediterranean beneath the moon, calm, luminous, breathing softly over its ancient wounds. Somewhere down there, under quiet layers of salt and time, the echoes of Atlantis still rest, not as ruins or treasure, but as lessons waiting for whoever is willing to listen. And if you listen long enough, you might hear them, not as words, but as a rhythm, the same rhythm that lives in the tide, in your breath, in everything that rises and falls, forever. The story of Atlantis is small compared to the story of the earth, and yet somehow the two are inseparable, because every myth we tell about loss, every dream of a vanished world, is really an echo of the planet's own rhythm, the slow, steady pulse of deep time. If you could stretch your sense of time far enough, if you could see millions of years the way you see minutes, you'd notice that the earth doesn't move through history. It breathes through it. Each breath is an age. Inhale, mountains rise, seas withdraw. Exhale, continents sink, oceans return. And between those breaths, life appears, transforms, and begins again. What we call catastrophe is only a blink in that vast pattern. What we call disappearance is only transformation, moving too slowly for us to watch. Imagine it. Ice ages advancing like slow white tides, grinding continents into shape, then melting into flood. Deserts forming where oceans once shimmered, forests growing on ground that was once seafloor, civilizations building on ancient coral and shells. We live, unknowingly, upon the bones of earlier worlds. The same earth that swallowed Atlantis has swallowed countless others. Islands, continents, entière écologie. And with every disappearance, something new was born. Long before any myth, there was the ocean Panthalassa, spanning nearly the entire planet. It was both womb and graveyard, its waves sculpting the first coasts, its depths storing the memory of vanished shores. When it receded, it left fossils of fish high in the Himalayas, seashells on mountaintops, small proofs that the sea once walked everywhere. Perhaps the people who dreamed of Atlantis were remembering something deeper than history, some ancient intuition that the earth has done this before, that land and sea trade places in an endless dance. If you stand beside a cliff and trace the rock layers with your eyes, you can read that dance. Each stripe is a chapter, red for desert, grey for ocean, black for volcanic fire. The planet has written its own diary there, in languages older than words. And if you listen closely, you might hear it, a heartbeat made of stone and water. That's the pulse of deep time. It moves too slowly to feel, but it never stops. Every generation thinks its world is permanent, Yet in deep time, nothing stands still long enough to be called forever. Even the continents drift like thoughts in sleep. Every 100 years, they shift a few centimeters, but over millions of years, those small movements redraw the entire planet. Once, South America was joined to Africa, their coastlines fitting like puzzle pieces. Once, Antarctica was green, covered in forests and rivers. Once, the Sahara was a garden of lakes. And perhaps once, there was also Atlantis, a name for one of those forgotten in-between moments, when the world changed its shape and no one survived to take notes. The earth doesn't keep monuments. It keeps patterns, the rise and fall of mountains, the flood and retreat of seas. These are its memories, and every so often it reminds us of them through a tremor, a storm, a fossil in the dust. Even the air you breathe tonight carries atoms that were once inside ancient oceans, inside creatures long gone. The oxygen in your lungs might have been part of coral that lived before mammals walked the land. The calcium in your bones may have belonged to something that swam. You are built from the very history you're trying to remember. Maybe that's why Atlantis touches us so deeply, because when we imagine a world lost to water, some hidden part of us recognizes the truth. We are not separate from that story. We are part of the same cycle, born of water, shaped by time, destined to return. Deep time doesn't care about beginnings or endings. It only knows motion. It teaches us patience, the kind that mountains understand, and it humbles us, gently, by showing how brief our moments are. The city of Atlantis, if it ever existed, lasted perhaps a few centuries. The memory of it has lasted millennia, but in the language of the earth, both are the same length, the flicker of a wave on an endless sea. Yet that flicker matters, because within it, consciousness appeared, the ability to look at the world and ask why. The earth may have countless rhythms, but only through us does it hear itself reflected as story. We are the part of the planet that dreams of its own past. And in that dream, Atlantis is the moment when the ocean looked into a mirror and saw its own reflection. So as you breathe now, imagine your inhale as the rising of land, your exhale as the returning tide. Feel yourself moving with the slow pulse of deep time. Every heartbeat you have belongs to it. Every memory is a ripple across its surface. When the night ends, the world will look the same, but somewhere, beneath your feet, a continent will have shifted a fraction of an inch. The planet will have changed, quietly, patiently, the way it always does. And maybe, far in the future, when our own cities are only whispers under the sand, someone else will tell a story about us. They'll call it by another name, but it will be the same story. A story about a people who built too close to the sea, who dreamed too brightly, and who disappeared into the rhythm of time. Atlantis was the first. We will not be the last. The sea is a patient archivist. It doesn't write history in words. It carves it in silence, stone by stone, tide by tide, and keeps it hidden just out of reach. When we peer beneath its surface, we are not just looking into water. We are looking into time, and, in that quiet blue archive, the ocean has preserved many secrets. Ruins that never meant to be ruins. Walls that once framed lives, now softened by coral. Stairways that climb nowhere. Pillars that hold only the weight of memory. These are the fingerprints of forgotten architects. Builders whose names dissolved long before the sea claimed their work. We often think of Atlantis as unique, the only city ever lost beneath the waves. But the truth is, the earth has many Atlantises, each one a fragment of the same story. Humanity reaching upward, and the ocean quietly, inevitably, reaching back. Off the coast of Egypt, near the mouth of the Nile, there once stood a city called Heracleion. For centuries it was only a legend mentioned by ancient Greek travelers, doubted by scholars. Then, in the year 2000, divers found it. Not in books, but in darkness. Its statues still upright, its columns resting on the sea floor like sleeping giants. Coins, amulets, inscriptions, all preserved in the sand, as if waiting to be remembered. They discovered entire temples, roads paved with limestone, and enormous carvings of pharaohs smiling through the green water. Heracleion had been real, a port where Egypt met the sea, a place of worship and trade, swallowed sometime around the 2nd century BCE. A single earthquake, a slow sinking of the delta soil, and the ocean took it back. Standing in the glow of their underwater lamps, the divers described a strange feeling, not awe exactly, but familiarity, as if they were visiting something they'd dreamed before, the way you might walk into a house you've never seen and somehow know which door leads to the kitchen. Maybe that's why stories like Atlantis stay alive, because each discovery like Heracleion feels like a reminder that the line between myth and memory is thinner than we think. Far across the world, near Japan's Ryukyu Islands, another mystery lies beneath the waves, the Yonaguni Monument, a massive stone formation shaped with uncanny precision. Terraces, steps, straight edges sharper than nature usually allows. Some scientists insist it's natural, a geological quirk of sandstone fractured by tectonic forces. Others see the remains of an ancient city, a prehistoric culture erased before written time. Whatever it is, it stirs the same question. Who built it? And why does it feel familiar? In the Pacific, another silent labyrinth rises from the sea. Nan Madol, the Venice of Micronesia, a network of basalt towers built on coral reefs, connected by canals, so old that even local legend calls it the work of giants. Its basalt blocks weigh tons, stacked with mathematical precision, but no one knows how they were moved or why the city was abandoned. The ocean, as always, keeps its answers. And then there's Dwarka, off the coast of India, a submerged city that ancient texts once described as the dwelling place of Krishna. For centuries, it was dismissed as mythology. Then, in 2002, divers found stone walls and streets beneath the Arabian Sea, dating back almost 9,000 years, older than any city known. Each of these places is real, and yet each feels unreal, too poetic, too precise, as if sculpted by memory itself rather than by hands. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Atlantis was never meant to be one city. Maybe it's a pattern, the eternal return of ambition and forgetting. When we look at these ruins, we are not just looking at lost civilizations. We are looking at our own reflection in deep time. The same curiosity, the same hunger to shape the world, the same quiet surrender when nature takes it back. Every stone in these underwater cities was once touched by a human hand. Someone carved it, lifted it, placed it carefully, believing it would last forever. They couldn't imagine that one day fish would swim where they prayed, or that their voices would turn into bubbles rising toward the surface. And yet, perhaps their faith wasn't misplaced, because in a strange way, their work did last. It endured not as buildings, but as story, as presence, as the hum of something larger than a single civilization. The forgotten architects built more than walls. They built a rhythm, the rhythm of creation and disappearance that still shapes us today. When modern divers descend into these ruins, they move carefully, as though walking through a memory. Their bubbles drift upward like tiny prayers, and in that brief, weightless silence, they touch what every seeker of Atlantis has been chasing all along, not proof, but connection. Because the truth is, we are not separate from those ancient builders. We carry the same hands, the same need to leave something behind. Every city we build is a note in the same song, a song that the ocean will one day sing back to itself. Perhaps the real Atlantis was never meant to be found, because it was never lost. It lives in every ruin, every echo, every act of creation that time eventually softens. It lives in us, the newest architects, building on the ruins of all who came before. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine those ancient hands working under the same sun that warms you now. Imagine their tools, their laughter, their dreams, so far away in time, yet so close beneath the skin of the world. The sea holds them gently, not as ghosts, but as memory. And if you listen carefully, you might hear them still, the forgotten architects, breathing through the waves, building once more, in the quiet of your imagination. There is a moment, deep beneath the sea, when sound disappears, No bubbles, no engines, no motion. Just stillness, a silence so complete it feels alive. That's where truth begins to feel like water, clear, invisible, and impossible to hold. Maybe that's why the story of Atlantis has survived for so long, because in the absence of proof, we found something even stronger: imagination. And imagination, when it is quiet, becomes its own kind of evidence. For centuries, people have searched for signs: walls under the waves, patterns on sonar scans, ancient maps with faint islands drawn between the lines. Some found nothing, others found too much. Each claimed discovery was followed by debate, doubt, and disappearance. The ocean, it seems, does not like to be solved, and so we are left with silence. But silence isn't the same as emptiness. Silence is what remains when everything else has been washed away. It's the residue of meaning after words have dissolved. Perhaps that's what Atlantis truly is. Not a city waiting to be uncovered, but a silence waiting to be understood. Because when we say we've found nothing, what we really mean is we've reached the edge of what our tools can measure. Beyond that edge lies something we can't define, a space for mystery, for reverence, for wonder. Think of all the other things we know exist without proof. Love, memory, consciousness. You can't weigh them or hold them, yet they shape every part of who we are. Why should the memory of a world be any different? If Atlantis was real, then its silence is the sound of distance, a voice calling from across 10,000 years, distorted by time, but still speaking through us. If it wasn't real, then the silence is still meaningful, proof that human beings crave meaning so deeply that we'll invent echoes just to have something to listen to. There's a quiet honesty in that. Science gives us facts, but silence gives us questions. And sometimes, the questions are the part that matters. Because when you sit in silence, you begin to hear other kinds of evidence. The way water moves around you, the way time softens everything it touches, the way your heart keeps time with the waves. Every diver who's gone deep enough knows that feeling. At a certain depth, your senses start to change. Light bends differently. The world turns blue, then grey, then black. You lose the horizon, lose direction, until up and down mean nothing. In that space, you stop looking outward. You begin to listen inward. And maybe that's exactly where Atlantis has been all along. Not below the sea, but beneath our thoughts. In the part of us that still believes in mystery. Philosophers call it the unseen proof. The idea that what cannot be found might still be real, because it continues to shape us. Atlantis does that. Even if it never existed, its silence has built whole worlds of imagination. Books, art, discovery, questions. In that sense, it has lived longer and louder than any verified city ever could. Maybe disappearance is a kind of transformation. When something vanishes so completely, it stops being matter and becomes meaning. It becomes the space that allows new thoughts to appear. Just like night allows us to see stars, the absence of Atlantis allows us to see possibility. There's another way to think about it. Every silence is a doorway. You can choose to close it, to say, nothing is there. Or you can step through it, to say, something once was. When Plato's words first reached the world, he didn't give coordinates. He gave a feeling, the sense that a truth had been lost, and that its loss mattered. That feeling was enough to keep the story alive for 2,400 years. No city needs to exist for that long, but an idea can, a silence can. If you listen to the ocean right now, not as a body of water, but as a presence, you'll notice that even silence there has texture. It hums, it breathes, it moves through frequencies too low for human ears. It's the sound of tectonic plates shifting, of whales calling miles apart, of water pressing against itself. To most people, that's nothing. To the patient listener, it's everything. Maybe Atlantis exists in the same way, not as ruins, but as resonance, the sound of a story too vast to vanish. And maybe this is the real lesson, that the world doesn't always reveal its truths through evidence. Sometimes it reveals them through longing, because what is longing, if not the body's way of remembering something it has never touched? And what is myth, if not the mind's way of keeping that longing alive. So tonight, let the silence of Atlantis be your evidence, not proof of where it was, but proof that we are still listening, that we are still capable of wonder. The ocean doesn't owe us answers. It only offers reflection. And when we look into that reflection, into the soft shimmer of absence, we see the same thing Plato saw long ago, a world trying to understand itself. Atlantis isn't gone. It's simply quiet. And in that quiet, it continues to speak. Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. The city as Plato described it. Rings of land and water, perfectly arranged. Circles within circles, all converging toward a shining heart. It sounds like architecture, but it feels like something else. Not a place, a pattern, a map of thought, a symbol of how all things, even ideas, revolve around a still center. In that way, Atlantis was not just built, it was imagined. Every stone, every canal, every golden bridge reflected a principle: order, harmony, connection. The outer rings held the ports and people, the inner ones held the temples, and at the very heart was the sanctuary of Poseidon, god of the sea, the shaker of worlds, the one who gives and takes, builds and breaks. To live in such a city would have been to live inside a metaphor. The citizens of Atlantis would wake each day surrounded by water, the element of emotion, of change, of reflection, and cross bridges of stone, the element of endurance. They lived, in other words, within the constant tension between stability and flow. Maybe that's why Plato chose the circle, because circles have no beginning, no end, no hierarchy. They represent wholeness, but also repetition. Every revolution returns to its start. Every age, no matter how glorious, carries within it the curve that leads back to humility. When people look for Atlantis on maps, they trace coastlines, depths, coordinates, but perhaps they should look inward, for the same geometry appears inside the human mind. We too are made of concentric rings, outer actions, inner thoughts, secret feelings, silent cause, and somewhere at the center, the same question waits. What happens when balance breaks? If Atlantis was designed to embody order, then its destruction was the breaking of that order, the shattering of symmetry. Maybe that's what makes the story so haunting, because deep down, we all sense that our own lives depend on the same fragile harmony between ambition and gratitude, between logic and love. Think of the city again, each ring glimmering under sunlight, each bridge connecting land to land, each channel alive with water that both divides and unites. That is how the human mind works, endlessly connecting, endlessly dividing, building bridges, erasing them, building them again. In dreams, water often symbolizes the unconscious, the part of us we can't quite see but can always feel. If that's true, then Atlantis wasn't a city surrounded by water. It was a city within it, a mind surrounded by its own thoughts. And when the sea rose to claim it, perhaps it wasn't punishment. Perhaps it was the return of the unconscious, the flood of everything we had tried too hard to control. In Jungian psychology, this is called the return of the repressed. What we bury eventually comes back, not to destroy us, but to remind us of what we forgot. Atlantis could be the oldest version of that idea, a civilization that built itself too perfectly and therefore forgot the beauty of imperfection. The myth says Poseidon loved the island and shaped it with his own hands. He gave it fountains of sweet and salty water, symbol of the union of opposites, the earthly and the divine. It's a reminder that opposites are not enemies, they're partners. Too much salt and nothing grows. Too little and nothing preserves. Wisdom is balance, and balance, like Atlantis, is easy to lose. Maybe the city's geometry is trying to tell us something, that creation isn't about perfection, but about motion, correction, renewal. The moment the rings stop turning, the city begins to drown. Stagnation is the first form of collapse. We can see this pattern everywhere, in galaxies spinning in fast cosmic rings, in atoms orbiting their centers, in the human iris, in the way water ripples when you drop a stone. It's as if the universe itself remembers Atlantis, the shape of balance held and lost. When you think of the city now, don't think of ruins under the sea. Think of circles living, moving, breathing, each one holding a truth, that order can exist only through change, and that everything beautiful must one day surrender to the flow. Plato's rings are not just geography, they are a reminder of how thought organizes reality. The mind seeks structure, but the heart seeks rhythm. Atlantis was both, and when one overpowered the other, the song ended. There's a line from an ancient Greek hymn that says, "Even the gods cannot escape the circle they have drawn." Perhaps that is the truest description of Atlantis. It created its own perfection, and perfection became its boundary, its tide, its fate. But if destruction is part of the circle, then so is renewal. The water that erased the city also preserved it, not in stone, but in symbol, and symbols never drown. They float between worlds, waiting to be recognized again. So, when you close your eyes tonight, imagine those concentric rings not as ruins, but as ripples spreading through time. Every age, every civilization, every person is touched by them in some way. The ripple passes through your life, too, whispering, "Remember balance, remember humility, remember wonder." Atlantis was a city made of symbols, but maybe it still exists? Not on the seafloor, but in the architecture of the mind, in the circles we build to protect ourselves, and the waves that inevitably teach us how to let go. And if you listen closely, you can hear the circle turning again, quietly, endlessly, as the tide always does. There's a moment in every myth when the gods stop speaking. Their voices, once loud as thunder, become echoes fading across the horizon. That silence is never sudden. It begins softly, like a breeze that forgets its name. And by the time humans notice it, the divine has already left the room. That's how Plato described the end of Atlantis. Not as a punishment, but as a withdrawal. The gods, he said, once walked among its people. They guided them, shaped them, protected them. But as pride grew and humility thinned, the divine part within humanity began to fade. The gods didn't strike the city down. They simply stepped back. And when they did, the balance broke, and the sea, as if noticing the vacancy, rose to take their place. It's a haunting image, a world left to its own brilliance, untethered from reverence, a civilization so advanced it forgot how to bow. Poseidon was said to be the patron of Atlantis, the god of water, storms, and horses, symbols of both creation and chaos. He was not cruel, but he was never calm. He ruled the line between order and fury, between beauty and destruction. It makes sense, then, that he would be the god of a city surrounded by the sea. And it makes sense, too, that when the people forgot who gave them their gifts, the gifts themselves would turn against them. In myth, the gods rarely destroy out of anger. They withdraw so that truth can return. When light becomes too blinding, darkness comes not to punish, but to balance. The flood, the storm, the silence. These are the earth's ways of restoring symmetry. Maybe Atlantis fell because its people stopped listening, not to Poseidon, but to the quiet pulse of nature itself. They built outward, upward, endlessly, until the sound of their own ambition drowned out the whisper of the sea. And when the whisper vanished, so did grace. There's an old Sumerian tablet older even than Plato that tells a story almost the same. It speaks of cities destroyed not for wickedness, but for forgetting gratitude. It says, "The gods did not curse the builders. They simply took their eyes away. And without that gaze, the world unraveled." It's a subtle kind of tragedy, the idea of being left alone with your own greatness. Because without something higher to answer to, pride becomes gravity. It pulls everything downward. If you think about it, we've all felt a version of that silence. Moments when something once sacred, a dream, a purpose, a connection, quietly drifts away. You wake one day, and the magic is gone, not because it was taken, but because you stopped tending to it. That's how gods leave, not with fire, but with absence. And yet, even in their absence, something remains. A faint shimmer in the air, like the trace of heat after lightning. That's what myths are, the residue of divine footsteps. We tell their stories not to worship them, but to remember the space they left behind. Atlantis, in this sense, wasn't destroyed. It was emptied. It became a mirror too bright for its own reflection. When the gods walked away, what filled the gap was water, the oldest and most faithful of all elements. Water remembers what we forget. It carries stories in its salt, and when it covers something, it doesn't erase it. It sanctifies it. Maybe that's why the sea feels sacred. When we stand before it, we lower our voices instinctively. We sense something vast, listening back, not judging, not intervening, just waiting for us to remember. Across cultures, the flood has always been the same story told in different tongues. In Mesopotamia, it was the wrath of the gods. In the Bible, it was the cleansing of creation. In Hindu cosmology, it was a cycle of renewal. In Greek myth, it was Deucalion and Pyrrha, floating on a wooden chest as the world began again. And beneath all these versions, one idea survives. Destruction is not the end. It's a breath between worlds. So when the gods of Atlantis left, they weren't abandoning their creation. They were giving it back to the sea to be remade, reimagined, reborn. There's a strange comfort in that, because even now, long after temples have crumbled and the names of gods have faded, their absence still shapes us. Every time we seek meaning, every time we look for beauty, we are answering the silence they left behind. Perhaps that's what Plato wanted us to hear. Not the thunder of punishment, but the whisper of return. When the divine steps away, the world doesn't end. It pauses. It waits for us to remember what it feels like to listen. So, if you ever find yourself by the ocean at night, and the wind is soft and the sky seems endless, listen for that space between the waves. The quiet rhythm that sounds almost like breathing. That's where the gods still live. Not as rulers, but as reminders. Not above us, but within us, waiting for us to hear them again. Atlantis was never just a warning about arrogance. It was a love story between humanity and the sacred, between creation and the sea, between what we build and what we're willing to lose. And though the gods walked away, they left a path behind, a trail of memory through myth, a map drawn in water and time, leading back to reverence. Follow that path, and you may find that Atlantis never really sank. It simply transformed, from a city to a story, from worship to wisdom, from the roar of the divine to the quiet hum of the soul remembering where it came from. Every myth has a heartbeat, and sometimes that heartbeat sounds a lot like science. If you listen closely, the mystery of Atlantis doesn't just live in temples and stories. It lives in pressure, motion, gravity, and time. Beneath every legend of gods and floods, there are tectonic plates quietly moving, doing the same work the divine once did in song, creating, balancing, erasing. The earth is never still. Its crust floats on a molten sea, thin as an eggshell, over a vast, churning core. Mountains are born from its slow collisions, and entire islands are swallowed when that same rhythm reverses. It's the planet's own pulse, steady, patient, unstoppable. If you could watch the world from above, not for a day or a lifetime, but for 1,000,000 years, you'd see continents drift like slow clouds. You'd watch oceans open and close. You'd see cities rise and vanish without leaving a line. It wouldn't look like destruction. It would look like breathing. Somewhere inside that breath, Atlantis found its moment and lost it. Scientists have long imagined what could make an island disappear. A single massive earthquake could fracture the ground beneath it. A volcanic collapse could drag its center into the sea. A sudden shift in pressure could trigger tsunamis that redraw the very borders of the world. To us, these events seem random. To the Earth, they're simply maintenance, the way a living body adjusts its heartbeat. If you travel through the Atlantic Ridge, the vast undersea scar running down the middle of the ocean, you can still feel that motion. Molten rock rises there, pushing the continents apart by inches every year. On a human scale, that's invisible. On a planetary one, it's everything. Over thousands of centuries, It can lift new islands from the dark or pull old ones beneath the surface as if the sea were exhaling. When Plato wrote that Atlantis disappeared in a single day and night of misfortune, he was describing something human, not geologic, the shock of watching eternity fold into an instant. But in Earth's language, that's how all change happens. Slow, 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 then suddenly, like a fault line breaking after centuries of quiet tension, like a heartbeat that skips. The eruption of Thera, the collapse of Doggerland, the sinking of ancient ports like Heracleon, they all followed the same hidden physics. Energy builds, pressure mounts, and when the threshold is crossed, balance becomes motion again. Destruction is only equilibrium finding a new form. That's difficult for us to accept because humans crave permanence. We build in stone. We draw maps as if the world were still. But the planet we live on isn't a statue. It's a conversation between fire and water, gravity and light, chaos and order. Atlantis was one of the words in that conversation, spoken, then allowed to fade. Even the sea itself isn't constant. It breathes in rhythm with ice. When glaciers melt, the ocean rises. When they grow, it retreats. The shorelines we think eternal are just temporary signatures on an ocean that is always rewriting itself. If Atlantis stood near the edge of one of those signatures, then its fate was written long before its story began. And yet, there's beauty in that inevitability, because what the earth erases, it also recycles. The stones of drowned cities turn to sand. That sand becomes sediment. Sediment becomes rock again. Someday, long after our time, that rock might rise as a mountain, and someone standing on its peak will hold a fragment of what was once Atlantis. That's not extinction. That's transformation. Physicists call it the law of conservation. Nothing truly disappears. It only changes state. Energy turns to matter. Matter turns to memory. Memory turns to myth. Atlantis has obeyed the same law all along. Even the ocean's darkness, that quiet place where sunlight never reaches, is full of renewal. Heat vents burst from the seafloor, creating entire ecosystems of glowing life. Creatures born in pressure and blackness thrive where nothing should. They remind us that endings are rarely endings. They're beginnings we haven't yet learned to see. When you think of Atlantis now, don't picture collapse. Picture conversion, energy shifting, form dissolving, a civilization returning to its elements. It didn't vanish. It completed its circuit. The hidden physics of disappearance is the same rhythm that governs stars. When a sun dies, it doesn't fall into nothing. It becomes something new, a nebula, a cradle for future light. Earth follows that same cosmic logic. Its losses are seeds, its ruins, instructions. Maybe that's why the myth still moves us, because in every life, there's a smaller Atlantis, a chapter that closes suddenly, a world that ends so another can begin. We call it change, heartbreak, rebirth. But beneath all of it is the same gentle law. Nothing is gone. Everything flows. So, breathe with the planet for a moment. Feel its pulse beneath you. Slow, deep, endless. The same rhythm that once pulled an island beneath the waves is moving through you now. You are made of the same physics, the same impermanence disguised as continuity. When you exhale, imagine Atlantis releasing its last breath into the sea. When you inhale, imagine that breath returning to you across the ages. Because it does. Every atom in your body was once part of something that vanished, and every breath you take is proof that disappearance is only another form of existence. Stone remembers what water forgets. It carries pressure, heat, and time inside its skin like quiet dreams. To us, a rock seems simple, heavy, silent, unchanging. But in truth, every stone is a story still speaking. It holds the ghosts of mountains long eroded, the fingerprints of oceans that vanished before names were born. When archaeologists brush sand from an ancient wall or carve a fossil from the cliffs, they aren't just uncovering matter, they're waking memory. Memory that has been asleep for 1,000,000 years, and if the earth could whisper, It would tell us that nothing is ever truly buried. It only waits for the right kind of attention. Perhaps Atlantis waits that way too, not as a city of marble beneath the sea, but as an imprint, a pattern fossilized in the deep layers of human imagination, a memory pressed into time, like the delicate trace of a leaf trapped in stone. Think about how fossils form. A creature dies and is covered by sediment. Its body decays, but its shape remains. Minerals seep in, replacing bone with crystal, turning life into a sculpture of endurance. That's how the earth remembers, not through life itself, but through transformation. Maybe civilization works the same way. Maybe Atlantis and every great culture that came and went became fossilized in us. Their tools turned to dust, their temples fell, but their ideas, symmetry, curiosity, longing for the divine, became part of the mineral structure of the human spirit. In that sense, we are walking fossils, living strata of memory. The stories we tell are just sediments of the past reshaped into new forms. Every myth, every song, every scientific discovery is the echo of something older, polished smooth by repetition, hardened into meaning. When you look at a stone building, a cathedral, a pyramid, a ruin, you're not just seeing human effort, you're seeing geology and memory working together. Our ancestors learned from the planet itself to build with what endures, to trust gravity, to align with the stars. They didn't separate spirit from matter, they saw both as teachers. Some of those stones still hum with that awareness. You can feel it in the ruins of Heracleion under the Nile, or in the standing stones of Karnak in France, or in the red walls of Petra catching the Sunday. They vibrate faintly with the memory of hands that touched them. It's not magic, it's continuity. It's the quiet knowledge that we are temporary, but form is not. The same could be true of Atlantis. Even if the city itself dissolved, the geometry of its design, the balance it represented, still echoes in our architecture, our art, our longing for harmony. You can trace it in everything circular, the design of ancient cities, the orbits of planets, the spirals carved on Neolithic stones. They all remember the same pattern, rings of order surrounding mystery. There's something tender about that, the idea that meaning can survive without material proof, that the essence of something can live on even when its body has crumbled. That's how memory works in both stone and soul. You can see it even in your own life. The places you once loved might no longer exist. A childhood home, a street, a voice, but their shape still lives inside you. You carry them the way the earth carries fossils. You are both the ruin and the remembrance. Scientists say the oldest mineral on Earth, a fragment of zircon found in Australia, is 4 billion years old. It formed when the planet itself was still cooling, when no life had yet stirred. And still, it remains, a tiny piece of eternity small enough to fit under a microscope. If you hold such a crystal to the light, you're looking at the memory of the world before the world. How strange and comforting that something so small can hold so much time. Atlantis might not have left such crystals behind, but it left something else. A frequency, a feeling, a question that keeps resurfacing in our minds. And that question has weight. It has shape. It is made of the same stubborn material as stone. In meditation, there's a practice called listening to the body of the earth. You sit still, breathe slowly, and imagine your bones as mountains, your heartbeat as magma, your thoughts as shifting tectonic plates. For a few moments, you become geological, a being of pressure and memory. And when you do, you understand something simple but profound, that disappearance is never destruction. It's just another layer being formed. The memory of Atlantis might live in that layer, beneath myth, beneath science, in the mineral consciousness of the planet. Every time the ocean crashes against cliffs, every time wind smooths a stone, a little of that memory awakens. It hums quietly underfoot. So, if one evening you walk along a beach and pick up a small rock polished by the tide, hold it for a moment. It's heavier than it looks, isn't it? That's because it carries time. It carries silence. It carries the slow story of everything that came before you, including Atlantis. And as you stand there, between sea and land, you'll realize that the memory of Atlantis was never lost. It's simply been compressed, like a fossil, like an idea, waiting for someone to feel its weight again. Take one slow breath. Let the air enter like a tide coming home. Hold it just long enough to feel its weight. Now let it go gently and listen to the sound of its leaving. That, in its simplest form, is loss. And it happens every moment you live. You breathe in, you gather. You breathe out, you release. The rhythm of the universe is written inside that movement. Gain, release. Creation, disappearance. Life, and then quiet. The story of Atlantis is really a meditation on this rhythm, on how beauty fades not because it's weak, but because fading is how beauty moves through time. To vanish is not failure. It's fulfillment, a return to stillness. When Plato wrote of the island sinking, he wasn't describing only the sea. He was describing us, the way every civilization, every person, every breath must one day dissolve into the same great silence. And yet, the strange thing about loss is that it's never complete. Every ending leaves a trace, like the warmth on your skin after sunlight, or the echo that lingers after a bell. That echo is what keeps the world soft. If you look around your own life, you'll see small Atlantises everywhere. A friendship that drifted away, a home that no longer stands, a version of yourself that you outgrew. All of them gone, yet somehow still here, shaping the person you've become. Loss teaches you how to listen differently. When something disappears, it doesn't stop speaking. It simply changes language. It speaks in absence, in space, in quiet memory. You just have to slow down enough to hear it. Tonight, as you lie in the dark, try this. Close your eyes and imagine an island. You've walked there 1,000 times in your mind. The sand is warm. The air carries salt and sunlight. You can hear laughter in the distance and the faint rhythm of waves. This is your Atlantis, the place inside you that holds everything you've loved and lost. Now picture the tide rising slowly, peacefully. The water touches your feet, your knees, your hands. You could run, but you stay, because you know this isn't destruction. It's completion. The sea isn't taking the island away. It's carrying it back into the whole. Watch it sink, not with sorrow, but with understanding. Every bubble, every ripple, is memory returning to motion. And when the last peak disappears beneath the water, what's left is calm, a wide, unbroken surface reflecting the stars. That calm is what all stories, all hearts, all worlds seek. We resist loss because we think it empties us, but maybe it clears us. The way pruning clears a tree to grow again, the way the sea clears a shore. In emptiness, there's room for new meaning, and in grief, there's proof that something once mattered. Think of the ocean that took Atlantis. Even now, it feeds life, carries songs of whales, cradles continents in motion. It doesn't mourn what it absorbed, it transforms it. The city became sand, sand became current, current became cloud, and someday that cloud will fall as rain on another shore entirely. Perhaps it already has. Maybe that's what the myth is really telling us, that nothing beloved is ever lost. It only changes address. If you've ever lost someone or something you loved, you already know this feeling. The ache that stays is not emptiness. It's connection without form. The love remains. It just doesn't need a body anymore. Atlantis disappeared, but it didn't leave us nothing. It left us awareness of fragility, of beauty, of the need to listen before the tide. It taught us that memory can be softer than fact and still hold truth. So, as you breathe now, imagine each inhale gathering all you've known, and each exhale setting it free, sending it back into the great current of being. You are not separate from that current. You never were. Loss only feels final from the shore. From the sea's perspective, everything is simply returning home. The next time you stand at the edge of the ocean, notice how every wave begins in silence and ends in silence. That's how the universe speaks. That's how Atlantis still speaks. Through patterns, through water, through you. You are both the island and the tide. You are what disappears and what remains. And somewhere beneath all that movement is peace. Vaste passion éternelle. The same peace that followed when the last stone of Atlantis slipped beneath the waves. Rest in that. Let the world fade for a while. Because nothing, not even loss, is ever truly gone. It's just waiting, quietly, to be remembered again. The tide always returns. So does the pattern. It may take centuries, even millennia, but what humanity forgets, it eventually reenacts. That is the quiet truth hidden in the myth of Atlantis. We are never finished building and never finished falling. Every civilization believes it is different. Every age calls itself the pinnacle, the one that will finally endure. We look at the ruins of the past with gentle pity, as if we've learned the lesson they did not. But if you zoom out far enough, you begin to see that we are drawing the same shape again, a new circle on an ancient sea. Look around. Our temples are taller now, but they shine with the same pride as those marble towers Plato imagined. Our ships have turned into satellites, crossing not oceans, but the dark between stars. And yet the questions remain unchanged. How much can we take before the balance shifts? How high can we rise before gravity remembers us? Perhaps that's what makes the story of Atlantis eternal, because it's not a record of the past. It's a mirror of the present. The philosopher's warning was never about a lost island. It was about a familiar behavior. The moment when progress begins to outrun wisdom. The moment when comfort becomes carelessness. When invention forgets humility. You can feel it even now. In the hum of cities that never sleep. In the glow of screens brighter than constellations. In the way we rush forward without always asking where. We build faster than we understand. We extract more than we give. We chase connection through machines while drifting further from the quiet that made us human. If the gods of Atlantis walked away, perhaps it was because the people stopped listening. And if something divine has gone silent in our time, maybe it's for the same reason. We are surrounded by information, but starved for meaning, drowned in noise, but missing the stillness that lets us hear ourselves. Maybe that's the modern version of the flood, not one of water, but of attention, a deluge of words, images, opinions, rising faster than we can swim. We call it progress, but sometimes it feels like drowning in light. And yet, even within this flood, there's hope, because every cycle, every rise and fall, carries with it a chance to awaken. The human story doesn't end with collapse. It begins again, a little wiser each time. History shows this. The fall of Rome made way for the Renaissance. The burning of libraries led to the birth of printing. Extinction is never total, it's transformation. Atlantis didn't vanish. It evolved, scattered, reassembled in new forms. In art, in memory, in the very rhythm of civilization itself. If you trace that rhythm, you'll find it in our architecture, the same love for symmetry and scale. You'll find it in our philosophies, the same yearning for order in chaos. You'll even find it in our technology, our endless effort to master nature while forgetting we are part of it. It's not failure, it's remembrance. We repeat because we're still learning what it means to balance power with peace. The lesson of Atlantis isn't to stop building, it's to build with awareness. To understand that creation without compassion collapses under its own weight, that the ocean always comes not to punish, but to reset. One day, long after we're gone, someone else may walk among our ruins, the broken glass towers, the quiet satellites orbiting dead skies. They'll ask who we were, what we believed, why we built so high and so fast. And maybe they'll invent a word for us, the same way we invented Atlantis. And maybe, in some way, that will be fair, because we, too, are part of the same pattern, dreamers who mistook permanence for promise. But here's the grace of the cycle. The ocean doesn't erase for cruelty, it erases for balance. And balance always finds its way back, through art, through empathy, through those who choose to see quietly instead of loudly. Perhaps you are one of them, the listener awake in the night, the one who pauses to breathe before the next wave. You, too, are part of this repeating story. But unlike those who came before, you can choose to notice it. You can choose not to rush the pattern. That's how the cycle breaks. Not through revolution, but through recognition. Through a single breath taken consciously, through a single act of care. Atlantis didn't disappear because it was evil. It disappeared because it forgot to rest. Because even worlds need sleep. And maybe that's what our time is asking of us now. To slow down, to remember that speed is not the same as progress, that silence is not emptiness, and that to pause is not to vanish, but to listen. So as the night deepens around you, and the sound of your breath merges with the quiet pulse of the world, remember, the pattern repeats, but awareness can rewrite it. You are both the builder and the witness, both the dream and the reminder. And every time you choose stillness over noise, you keep the next Atlantis from sinking. What if Atlantis never existed, and yet has always been real? Not as land, not as stone, not as ruins hidden beneath the sea, but as an idea drifting quietly through the human mind, appearing in new forms each time we begin to forget it. Perhaps that's why it feels familiar even to those who've never read Plato. You don't need to study history to know what Atlantis is. You feel it, that longing for something just beyond reach, a perfect world half remembered from a dream, a home you can describe but cannot return to. Atlantis might not be a place we lost. It might be a memory we were born with. Every culture carries a version of it. The Garden of Eden, the Golden Age, Shambhala, Avalon. Each one speaks of a paradise, luminous, balanced, whole, that disappeared when humans forgot how to live in harmony. Different names, same ache, the same whisper that says, once, the world was whole, and it can be again. Maybe Atlantis is the name we give to that collective memory, the echo of our first balance with the earth. Before we built walls between ourselves and nature, before we divided the sacred from the ordinary, there was a moment when humanity listened, and in that listening we belonged completely. Plato wrote that Atlantis fell because it lost its virtue, because its people grew distant from the spirit that had once guided them. It's easy to read that as punishment, but what if it's simply the natural ebb and flow of consciousness? We're awaken, we forget, we awaken again. Atlantis is the memory of awakening. You can see it in art, in the way painters chase impossible light, in the way music seems to remember emotions we've never lived. You can hear it in lullabies that don't belong to any single culture, in melodies that sound ancient even when they're new. Maybe we aren't inventing beauty, maybe we're recovering it. When you close your eyes and imagine Atlantis, you're not picturing an island, you're tracing a blueprint drawn deep within the mind, a design that says, there is harmony between the visible and the invisible, between reason and wonder, between doing and being. That blueprint surfaces every time humanity begins to rebuild itself, after wars, after floods, after darkness. It's as if the memory of Atlantis stirs, reminding us that perfection was never about buildings or gold. It was about awareness, a civilization that saw the world not as something to conquer, but as something to belong to. And maybe, in small moments, that awareness still returns. When a scientist looks through a telescope and feels awe instead of control, when a child stares at the ocean and feels love instead of fear, when you pause to breathe and notice that the same air filling your lungs once filled the skies above ancient worlds. That's Atlantis, not lost, not gone, but living quietly inside you. There's a line from the mystic poet Rumi: "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." Maybe that's what the myth means. Atlantis isn't under the sea. It is the sea, the vast, endless memory of everything that has ever been alive. And we, each of us, are drops of that memory. When we forget who we are, the ocean withdraws. When we remember, it returns. That's the real cycle, not rise and fall, but remembering and forgetting. If you listen carefully, you can feel the memory of Atlantis waking everywhere. In the way humans are beginning to look back at the earth with tenderness, in the way we speak now of balance, sustainability, healing. These are the same words, just translated into our time. It's as if the old city is rebuilding itself, not in stone, but in consciousness. Perhaps that was always its destiny. No physical city can last forever, but an idea can travel through eternity, changing language, changing shape, waiting for its meaning to be heard again. Atlantis, then, is not history. It's prophecy fulfilled in slow motion, a reminder that paradise was never lost. It was simply misunderstood. When Plato's students asked him where Atlantis was, he pointed west, toward the open sea, toward mystery. But maybe what he really meant was inward, because the map of Atlantis doesn't begin in coordinates. It begins in silence, in the still point inside you that remembers wholeness. So, as you breathe now, let the myth return to where it belongs inside your chest. Each heartbeat is a tide, each thought a wave returning to the shore of memory. The ocean outside and the ocean within are the same water, and if you listen to them long enough, they will both tell you the same story, that Atlantis was never destroyed. It simply became you. The ocean has always been our oldest teacher. Long before there were schools, scriptures, or stories, there was the sound of waves, steady, unhurried, eternal. It was the first rhythm we ever heard after our mother's heartbeat, and it still speaks to us in the same language, repetition and rest. When you sit beside the sea, you don't need to understand it. You only need to listen, because everything the ocean teaches cannot be said, only felt. It has no voice, yet it speaks of patience. It has no face, yet it mirrors every mood of the sky. It has no boundaries, yet it reminds us that nothing truly belongs to us. For thousands of years, we've stood on its shore, trying to measure it, predict it, master it. But no matter how much we learn, the sea remains a mystery, not because it hides from us, but because it refuses to be owned. That, perhaps, is its greatest lesson. The ocean gives everything and keeps nothing. It receives rivers, storms, ashes, light, and then returns them all, transformed. It teaches us that to hold too tightly is to drown. That flow, not control, is the secret shape of wisdom. When Plato imagined Atlantis swallowed by the sea, he wasn't just writing about destruction. He was describing the way the ocean teaches balance. By taking back what was built without humility, every wave that rises also falls. Every creation that forgets its source is called home. The ocean's patience is endless. It can take 1,000 years to carve a coastline and another 1,000 to erase it. It never hurries, never resists. It simply moves in harmony with gravity and moonlight, trusting that everything finds its way back to depth. That too is part of its teaching. The quiet. The ocean has no mouth, yet it teaches in perfect silence. It doesn't need language, only movement. It shows, it reminds, it reflects. That's how all great teachers speak, not through answers, but through rhythm. When you stand at the edge of the sea, you already know this. The first thing you notice is not the sound of waves, but their patience. They arrive, retreat, arrive again. Never in a hurry, never the same twice. If you stay long enough, you realize they're not coming to you. They're coming through you. You, the shore, the wind, the sea, all are parts of the same lesson. The ocean doesn't keep what it holds. It lets everything pass. Ships, light, dreams, even continents. Everything that enters it must learn the same truth. To move is to live. To cling is to drown. That's the wisdom Atlantis forgot. Not a failure of architecture or morality, but a failure to remember the rhythm. They built walls against the water, forgetting that the sea is not an enemy. It's a mirror. When you resist it, it erases you. When you move with it, it carries you forever. You can feel this truth in your own body. Your blood carries salt, the same salt as the ocean, the same mineral that filled the first waves billions of years ago. You don't just live beside the sea. You are part of it. It flows in you. It breathes through you. Every heartbeat is a tide returning home. That's why the sound of the sea calms the mind. It reminds your body of something older than fear, the rhythm that existed before language, before thought, before even land. Ancient mystics called this rhythm the pulse of remembering. When they meditated, they would listen to their own breath. until it matched the pattern of the waves, not to escape the world, but to become one with its movement, to stop fighting the tide, to understand that surrender is not loss. It's alignment. The ocean teaches this every day. Watch how it gives itself completely to gravity, falling into itself again and again, yet never breaking. It doesn't fear its own depth. It accepts darkness as part of its design. We too have depths we fear to enter, memories, emotions, silences that seem too heavy. But the ocean shows that darkness isn't absence, it's foundation. Light cannot exist without it. The deeper the sea, the more pressure it holds, and the more life it creates. The creatures that live in the blackest waters are not cursed by shadow. They shine because of it. Perhaps that's what the myth of Atlantis means at its core, that we must learn to live with our own depth, to honor the unseen parts of ourselves instead of pretending they don't exist. Atlantis fell not because it was evil, but because it forgot to listen to the water beneath its own stones. The ocean teaches humility. Stand before it, and your importance dissolves in seconds. You realize how small you are, and somehow that realization feels like peace. You don't have to hold everything. You don't have to know everything. You just have to float, breathe, and trust the current. The ocean also teaches compassion. It touches every shore without judgment, embraces every river that flows into it, forgives the waste we pour into it, and still keeps giving it rain, life, balance. It doesn't withhold its lessons, even when we ignore them. It waits, endlessly patient, because it knows time better than we do. If you want to learn from the ocean, you don't need to dive deep. You only need to be still. Let your thoughts come and go like waves. Notice how they rise from silence and fall back into it. The mind, like the sea, clears itself through motion. The trick is not to stop the waves. It's to stop letting them scare you. When you learn to listen that way, you begin to understand why the sea is sacred in every culture. The Polynesians called it the ancestor of all life. The Greeks called it the body of Poseidon. In Islam, it is said that between two seas lies a barrier that they cannot cross, a metaphor for balance and respect. In Buddhism, enlightenment is often compared to a calm ocean, waves on the surface, but infinite stillness beneath. All these teachings say the same thing. The sea is not just water. It is awareness made visible, a living mirror for everything that exists. And like any good teacher, it doesn't demand devotion. It asks only presence, to sit beside it, to breathe with it, to notice how it moves. Because in watching it, you begin to see yourself more clearly, your own tides, your own storms, your own calm returning after each one. If Atlantis was ever truly wise, it learned these lessons first. And if it fell, it was only because it stopped learning. But you are still here, still standing where land meets sea, still listening. So listen a little longer. Let the ocean speak through its rhythm. It says, you don't need to last forever to matter. You don't need to rise to be beautiful. You only need to move and to return. And maybe that's all the wisdom the world has ever needed. Somewhere between silence and sound, between forgetting and remembering, a whisper still moves through time. You can't record it or measure it. You can only feel it when the world goes quiet enough. That whisper is all that remains of Atlantis. It isn't the echo of a city underwater. It's the echo of a thought that beauty once existed in perfect balance, and that maybe, somewhere, it still does. The whisper isn't ancient, it's eternal. It speaks in the language of waves and breath, in the small moments when your mind softens and the noise fades. When you stand by the sea, or hear rain against glass, or drift towards sleep, that's when it reaches you. You don't have to believe in Atlantis to hear it. You only have to remember what it feels like to wonder, because wonder is what keeps the world alive. It's what makes us look for lost continents, search the stars for new homes, write myths about gods who loved us enough to let us begin again. We've been chasing that feeling since the first fire was lit. Every myth that survives does so because it says something true about what it means to be human. Atlantis speaks of our fragility, yes, but also of our persistence. our refusal to let beauty end with destruction. The city sank, but the dream floated. And even now, it drifts between us, passing quietly from one imagination to another. Maybe that's the real miracle, that a single story could travel across centuries, through floods and wars and empires, and still carry warmth like a flame cupped in trembling hands. That whisper, the one you're hearing now, is that same flame. It tells us you are not separate from what came before. The memory you call Atlantis isn't ancient history. It's your own longing taking shape. It's the part of you that wants the world to be gentle again, the part that believes in the possibility of harmony even when chaos surrounds you. That's why the story endures, not because it was proven, but because it refuses to stop meaning something. If you could listen to the earth itself, if you could place your ear against its crust and hear the slow groan of continents moving, you might realize that the planet, too, remembers. The sea, the sand, the wind, they all carry that same whisper in different tones. They speak of change without fear, of loss without bitterness, of creation without pride. It's strange how myths and geology agree on this one thing. Nothing ever truly disappears. Everything becomes part of everything else. What we call history is just the sound of the world rearranging itself. The ruins of Atlantis might now be coral reefs. Its palaces might be crushed into the very minerals that make up the seabed beneath our feet. And its people, perhaps their atoms have long since entered the clouds. The trees, the bodies of all who came after. In that sense, the Atlanteans never vanished. They became the world they once lived in, just as we will, one day. That thought should not bring fear. It should bring peace. Because the whisper that remains is not a warning, it's an invitation to remember, to listen, to belong, to live in awareness that everything you love is part of a cycle, fragile, yes, but also eternal in motion. To know that even if something precious disappears, it will return in another form, and another, until it teaches what it was always meant to teach. If you quiet yourself now, you might hear that whisper within your own breathing, the soft pulse of memory that connects you to every moment before you, every rise and fall, every tide, every dream ever dreamed under this same sky. Atlantis was one dream among billions, but it was the one that dared to speak about its own ending. It was the story that taught us that vanishing can be holy, that to dissolve is to return to the source. So, as you drift now, between waking and sleep, between time and timelessness, let that whisper guide you. It's saying, you are made of everything that was. You belong to everything that will be. You are not the listener, you are the echo. And if you let it, the whisper will grow quieter still, until it's no longer outside you, but inside, where the sea meets the soul, where all stories end and begin again. Atlantis is gone, and yet it is here, in your breath, in your pulse, in the memory that survives even when words fade. That is the whisper that remains, the last voice of the sea, the softest reminder of all that nothing ever truly sinks, only changes depth. The night is quiet now, the tide has slowed, and even the wind seems to listen. We've reached the end of the story, or perhaps only the beginning of its next wave. Atlantis has disappeared and reappeared countless times in our thoughts tonight, as history, as dream, as mirror, as memory, and now as something simpler, a feeling, that quiet ache that lingers after wonder, that softness that comes when you finally stop asking where and start asking why. Maybe that's how all stories end, not with answers, but with understanding. When Plato wrote about the island's fall, he ended with silence. No survivors, no maps, no return. Just the ocean, vast, eternal, unbothered. The story fades back into the same stillness it came from. That's how the sea tells time, not in centuries or seasons, but in breaths, waves rising and falling like memory, each one erasing what came before so that something new can begin. If you listen now, you can almost hear that rhythm echoing inside you. Your breath, the slow beat of your heart, the sound of your thoughts drifting outward like foam. The ocean outside and the one within have finally met each other. This is the lesson that remains. That disappearance is not death, and ending is not loss. Every tide that leaves returns as another. Every story that sinks rises in a different voice. Even silence is only sound waiting to be born again. The next wave is already forming somewhere beyond the horizon. You can't see it, but you can feel it. The faint pull at the edge of perception, the quiet anticipation that always comes before awakening. Maybe that wave is another civilization. Maybe it's another thought, another dream, another you, because that's the secret the ocean has been whispering all along. We are the continuity. We are what rises again. We build, we lose, we remember. We become the new Atlantis, the living proof that even what vanishes can learn to speak again. The earth, too, knows this pattern. Every time the sea reclaims a shore, it's not destruction, it's dialogue. The land gives, the water answers, balance restored through movement, harmony returning home. That's how life survives, by being willing to begin again. And maybe that's what the myth has always asked of us, to stop clinging to permanence and start trusting renewal, to stop fearing the end and start listening for what it makes possible. Tonight, as you rest in this quiet space, try to feel that truth in your own body. Every cell within you is in motion. Every breath, every heartbeat is the ocean remembering itself in miniature. You are not separate from its story. You are one of its waves. And waves don't end. They transform. They meet the shore, release their energy, and return to the deep, becoming the next tide, the next rhythm, the next whisper. So when the morning comes and the world stirs awake again, carry that rhythm with you. Walk softly, speak gently, build beautifully, but remember, even beauty must know when to rest. Atlantis fell because it forgot how to listen. You still can. You can listen to the silence that holds everything together, the pause between words, the breath between thoughts, the stillness between waves. That's where wisdom lives. That's where the next wave begins. If you listen closely now, you'll hear it forming somewhere deep in the quiet, beyond time, beyond need. A soft vibration, like the first heartbeat of the world. The ocean turning again, the story returning to itself. You drifting towards sleep, becoming part of that motion. Because in the end, Atlantis is not a place to be found. It is a rhythm to remember, a reminder that even after disappearance, life continues to move. So rest now. Let the tide carry you home. Let the next wave take shape beyond your dreams. And when you wake, know that somewhere, beneath light and silence, the story still goes on. Patient, infinita, forever beginning again. Good night, and may the ocean keep your dreams safe until the next wave returns.